You are surrounded by people every single day, and you have never felt more alone in your life. Not because nobody is there, but because nobody is really there. You go to work, you come home, you scroll, you sleep, you do it all again. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, in the gap between who you show the world and who you actually are, there is this quiet, this specific, heavy, unexplainable quiet that you have never fully told anyone about. Because how do you explain that you are lonely when by every external measure, you are not alone? Today we explain it. And today we offer you something the Stoics discovered 2,000 years ago that the modern world has almost completely forgotten: the difference between being alone and being lonely, and why understanding that difference might be the most important thing you learn this year. Before we go anywhere, I want to say something real. Loneliness is one of the most common human experiences alive right now. Studies show it has reached what researchers are calling epidemic levels, not just in elderly people living alone, in young people, in people with full social lives, in people who have partners, families, friends, careers. Loneliness is no longer about how many people are around you. It is about how deeply you are known. And most people, despite being constantly connected, are not deeply known by anyone, including themselves. That last part is the one most loneliness conversations never reach. And that is exactly where the Stoics begin. Because the Stoics understood something radically different about solitude and loneliness than what our culture teaches. They did not see solitude as a problem. They did not see being alone as a lack. They saw it as a resource, a place where the clearest thinking happens, where the truest version of yourself lives, where the noise of the world finally gets quiet, enough for you to hear what actually matters. That does not mean loneliness does not hurt. It does, deeply. But it means there is a difference, a profound, life-changing difference between the loneliness that comes from disconnection from others and the solitude that comes from deep connection to yourself. Let us find that difference together. Part 1. The loneliness nobody talks about. Let me describe something and I want you to notice whether this sounds familiar. You are at a gathering, a party, a family dinner, work drinks, a celebration of some kind. People are laughing. Conversations are happening around you. You are participating, saying the right things, smiling at the right moments, playing your role. And yet, somewhere just beneath the surface, you feel it, that glass wall, the one that sits between you and genuine connection. You can see the warmth on the other side. You can almost feel it. But there is something you cannot quite name what, that stops it from fully reaching you. And you go home, and the house is quiet. And the quiet is not peaceful. It is the specific, heavy kind of quiet that arrives when you realize, not for the first time, that you moved through an entire evening, surrounded by people, and felt not one moment of being truly seen. That is the loneliness nobody talks about. Not the kind that comes from having nobody around. The kind that comes from being around people who know your name, but not your weight, who know your story, but not your silence, who would notice if you were absent, but have never really asked what it cost you to be present. And here is what makes this kind of loneliness so specifically painful. It comes with shame attached, because you are supposed to be okay. You have people around you. You have a life. You have things to be grateful for. And yet here you are, quiet in a room full of noise, alone in a crowd, unknown in a world that has never offered more ways to be connected. There is nothing wrong with you. This is one of the defining experiences of the modern human. And the Stoics, who lived in a world of political chaos, plague, war, and the constant performance of the Roman court, understood it intimately. Part 2. What the Stoics actually said about solitude. Let me introduce you to something Seneca wrote in a letter to his friend Lucilius. He said, "Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with people who will make a better person of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is a mutual one. People learn as they teach." Now read the first line again. Retire into yourself as much as you can. This was written by a man who lived at the center of the most powerful empire in the world, who had access to more people, more social connection, more noise and activity than almost any human of his time. And his advice was, go inward, not away from people, but inward, into yourself. Because Seneca understood, and this is the Stoic insight, that changes everything. You cannot be genuinely connected to others until you are genuinely connected to yourself. The loneliness that most people feel is not a failure of their social life. It is a symptom of their relationship with their own inner world. When you do not know yourself deeply, when you have never spent time in the quiet with who you actually are, you bring a surface version of yourself into every relationship, and surface versions of people can only create surface connections, and surface connections, no matter how many of them you have, feel like loneliness, because they are. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." This is one of the most remarkable sentences ever written. Here is a man who was emperor of Rome, who was surrounded at every moment by advisors, generals, senators, servants, who had not one private moment in the entire public performance of his life. And he found his retreat, his peace, his quiet, his home, not in a place, but in his own soul. He was never alone, and he was never lonely, not because his circumstances were perfect. They were far from perfect, but because he had built, through years of daily Stoic practice, a relationship with his inner world, so rich, so full, so known, that the outer world's noise could move around him without disturbing what was inside. That is the goal, not to have no loneliness, but to have a self so whole that solitude becomes home, rather than exile. Epictetus, who spent years as a slave, had perhaps the most striking perspective on aloneness of all the Stoics, a man with no freedom of movement, no choice of company, no ability to leave, and yet he wrote, "Never say about anything that I have lost it, but that I have returned it." What he could not lose, what no master, no circumstance, no amount of isolation could ever take from him, was his mind, his values, his relationship with himself. And from that place, even in the most physically confined circumstances imaginable, he was never truly alone, because he was always in the company of his own clear, free, dignified mind. That is the Stoic secret to solitude. Your own mind, cultivated, examined, known deeply, is the best company you will ever keep. Part 3. Why modern life makes us lonelier than ever. Now let us talk about why this is getting worse, not better. Because despite having more ways to connect than any generation in history, we are the loneliest. Here is why. Reason 1. We have confused connection with contact. Contact is easy. We have more of it than ever. Messages, notifications, likes, comments, the constant low hum of other people's presence in our pockets. But contact is not connection. Connection requires depth, time, vulnerability, shared silence, the willingness to be seen as something other than your best version. And most of what we call connection today is contact dressed up to look like more. We scroll through the highlight reels of hundreds of people's lives and feel simultaneously overloaded and deeply unfed, because the soul does not need content. It needs contact, real contact, the kind that has weight to it. Reason 2. We have outsourced our inner lives. The Stoics practiced daily solitude, journaling, reflection, quiet thinking. They understood that without regular time, in your own company, genuinely in your own company, not distracted company, you lose the thread of yourself. Modern life has made that thread almost impossible to hold. The moment a quiet moment arrives, the phone comes out. The moment a difficult feeling surfaces, there is something to numb it with. The moment genuine solitude begins, something is found to fill it. And so most people never actually spend time with themselves. They spend time distracted from themselves. And distraction from yourself is just loneliness with better entertainment. Reason 3. We have made vulnerability a performance. Genuine connection requires vulnerability, the willingness to be seen as uncertain, struggling, afraid, confused, imperfect. But vulnerability has become something we perform rather than something we practice. We share our struggles in ways designed to be received well, edited for palatability, curated for response. And real vulnerability, the messy, unedited, "I do not know what I'm doing" kind stays hidden because it feels too risky, too much, too likely to push people away. And so we stay connected at the surface and lonely underneath, where nobody ever quite reaches us, and we never quite reach anyone else. Reason 4, we have forgotten how to be alone. The inability to be alone comfortably, the need to always have noise, always have company, always have something to fill the silence, is itself a symptom of loneliness, not a cure for it. People who are afraid to be alone are afraid because when the noise stops, when the distraction falls away, they find themselves in the company of someone they do not know very well, themselves, and that stranger is uncomfortable to be with. The Stoics would say, the discomfort you feel in your own company is the most important signal you could possibly receive. It is simply telling you there is work to do here, not work on your social life, work on your relationship with yourself. Part 4, the difference between solitude and loneliness. Now we get to the heart of it, because the entire Stoic approach to this topic rests on one distinction. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. They can look identical from the outside. One person alone, quiet, but from the inside, they are completely different experiences. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted disconnection. It is the feeling of wanting to be known and not being known, of wanting to be seen and moving through the world unseen, of wanting company that genuinely nourishes you and finding only its absence. Loneliness is involuntary. It is a lack, an ache. Solitude is the practice of chosen aloneness. It is being in your own company, deliberately, purposefully, and finding in that company something rich, nourishing, sufficient. Solitude is a resource, a place you go to find yourself, to think clearly, to hear your own voice, beneath the noise of everyone else's. The Stoics did not aim to eliminate loneliness. That would be naive. They aimed to build such a deep, honest, intimate relationship with their own inner world that solitude became not an absence, but a presence, the presence of a known, trusted, companionable self. And from that foundation, from that place of genuine inner companionship, their relationships with others became something different, not born from need, not from the desperate hunger of loneliness, but from genuine abundance, the overflow of a person who is already full. Part 5, how to build a relationship with yourself. Now let us get into the real work, because understanding the difference between solitude and loneliness is necessary, but it is not sufficient. You have to actually build the relationship with yourself. That makes solitude possible, and that requires practice. Deliberate, consistent, daily practice. Here is how the Stoics did it, and how you can start today. Not with a conversation with your partner, with a conversation with yourself. Who am I when nobody is looking? What do I actually think? What do I actually feel? What do I actually want? What do I actually need? Most people cannot answer those questions with any real specificity, because they have spent so long being who others need them to be, they have lost track of who they actually are. And you cannot be genuinely known by someone else until you know yourself. Part 7, the gift of chosen aloneness. Here is what the Stoics want us to understand, that our culture actively works against. Being alone, truly, comfortably, voluntarily alone, is one of the most powerful things a human being can learn to do, not as a permanent state, not as a rejection of connection, but as a practice, as the place you return to remember who you are, before the world tells you who you should be. In solitude, your opinions are your own, your feelings are your own, your thoughts are your own. Nobody's expectations are shaping what you think. Nobody's needs are pulling at your attention. Nobody's approval is being sought. Just you, with yourself. And in that space, if you stay in it long enough, if you resist the urge to fill it, something extraordinary happens. You begin to enjoy your own company, not in a self-absorbed way, not in a way that makes connection less important, but in the way that the best friendships work. You become genuinely glad to be spending time with the person you are with, and that person is you. When that happens, when you genuinely enjoy your own company, loneliness loses most of its power, because loneliness needs you to believe that being alone is the problem. And the moment you discover that being alone can be nourishing, can be peaceful, productive, honest, rich. You stop running from it, and the energy you used to spend running from solitude, that energy becomes available for something else entirely, for the kind of deep, genuine, unhurried connection with the people who actually matter, from a place of want rather than need, from a place of abundance rather than hunger, from a place that says, I'm already whole, and I choose to share that wholeness with you. That is the most powerful position from which to build a relationship. Any relationship. Part 8. What loneliness is really asking for. I want to close the teaching with something important. Loneliness is not the enemy. I know it feels like it is. I know the ache of it is real and heavy and sometimes unbearable. But loneliness is a signal, and like all signals, it is only useful if you listen to it instead of drowning it out. Here is what loneliness is almost always asking for. It is asking for you to know yourself more deeply. It is asking for your relationships to be more honest. It is asking for your solitude to be more intentional. It is asking for your inner life to be given the same care and attention you give to everything and everyone outside. It is asking in the only language it has. Come home to yourself. Marcus Aurelius said, nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. That retreat, that quiet, known, inhabitable inner world, is not something you are born with. It is something you build. One journal entry at a time. One morning of quiet at a time. One honest conversation with yourself at a time. One moment of sitting with discomfort, instead of running from it, at a time. And the loneliness that drove you here, to this video, to this conversation, is not your enemy. It is the invitation. The invitation to stop looking for yourself in other people, in their approval, their attention, their company, and start finding yourself in the only place you were always going to be, inside. Part 9. A letter to the lonely person watching this. Let me step outside the structure for a moment and just speak to you directly. If you are watching this at the end of a day that felt empty, if you are lying in bed with the familiar weight of it pressed against your chest, if you smiled at everyone today and came home and felt nothing, I want you to know something. You are not failing at life. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not destined for this feeling. You are a person who has not yet been fully introduced to themselves, and that, as uncomfortable as it is fixable. Not quickly, not easily, but completely. The Stoics were not born with inner peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private journals, full of doubt, struggle, and the confession of his own loneliness. Seneca wrote letters about how hard it was to be consistently true to himself. Epictetus, a man in chains, found freedom not because his circumstances improved, but because he decided to. They were not superhuman. They were deeply human people who chose, every single day, to do the work of knowing themselves. And that work led them somewhere the world could not touch. You can go there too. It starts not with other people. It starts with you. With 20 minutes of quiet tomorrow morning. With 3 honest questions before you sleep tonight. With 1 moment today of being with yourself instead of running from yourself. Start there. You are not alone in your loneliness, and you are one decision away from never being quite as lonely as you are right now.